Hi folks, and welcome to our second digestive system lecture. We finished off talking about the stomach in our last session and all the secretions that come out of the stomach, the enzymes that come out of the stomach, and we also talked about some of the volumes. Remember, we talked about 2 to 3 litres of secretions are coming out of the stomach and into the lumen of the stomach. So we're actually building up that number of all those secretions coming into the GI tract, about 1.5 litres of saliva. Now we've got 2 to 3 litres of gastric juice. In this session we're going to look at the pancreas in this first part of the Camtasia here, and we'll see that the pancreas contributes even more secretions into the GI tract in terms of the liquid and all the enzymes that are in it. So that's really our first Camtasia, is we're going to cover that first dot point there, the pancreas. Have a look at its anatomy, what's in the pancreatic juice, and then essentially what it does. Okay, so the pancreas, it's quite a most people are surprised how large of an organ it is in people. 12 to 15 centimetres long and 2.5 centimetres thick, so it's quite thick, quite long, and it sits in a really important area of the gut. It sits just under the great curvature of the stomach. So remember, we talked about the great curvature of the stomach, and that's the area of the stomach that sort of expands as it grows in volume, as it fills up with food. Sitting just underneath that, in that curve, so it's a C-shaped sort of curve, is the duodenum. So the pancreas itself, it's got 3 parts: a head, body and a tail, and it sort of enters and allows all its secretions, its exocrine secretions, into the duodenum, and it allows those secretions to come into the duodenum via 2 important ducts: the pancreatic duct, which is really the main pancreatic duct, and an accessory duct. Duct of Wirsung is another name for the pancreatic duct, and the duct of Santorini is the accessory duct. But we're going to call them pancreatic duct and accessory duct. Let's have a look at the picture there. So on there you can see we've actually taken the stomach out. So you can imagine that the stomach is actually sitting here. So that great curvature is actually sitting just here. Okay, and so it's sitting right next door to the great curvature of the stomach there. There's the pyloric sphincter through here. So this is where the stomach empties into the duodenum here. And you can see here's our pancreas, the tail section, the body and the head. All the exocrine secretions you can see are emptying into the duodenum, either via the pancreatic duct or via the accessory duct. Okay, so let's have a look at one of those ducts in a bit more detail over to the right here. We've got our pancreatic duct here, and look what else we've got joining in terms of secretions is we've got the common bile duct. So right here at the duodenum is a really important part of the small intestine, because we've got all the exocrine secretions coming from the pancreas and the exocrine secretions coming from the gallbladder, which originate from the liver, of course. So it's a really important area of the small intestine, isn't it? Because you've got all the bile entering in and all the pancreatic enzymes entering in right at the duodenum. And right at the duodenum is, of course, where the small intestine first receives the food from the stomach. So we're going to talk a little bit later on in this Camtasia about how all that's controlled. The gut's got to know what's in it in order to digest it properly. So you'll see there's lots of hormonal and neural reflexes which tell the pancreas and the gallbladder what to do in terms of secretions into the duodenum so as to digest the food that's coming out of the stomach. So there's a real coordination of what's coming out of the stomach as to what's secreted into the small intestine from the gallbladder and the pancreas, so as to digest what's coming into it in the most efficient way. Okay. So, if we were to have a look inside the pancreas and have a look at the cells in there, so look at the histology of the pancreas, we would find that most of the pancreas is in fact the exocrine gland. So it's arranged into acini, or these dark clusters. Okay, so most of the pancreas is made up of dark clusters, and that's these sorts of this sort of area through here. All these dark clusters, that's the exocrine tissue. And you've only got a small pale region, which they're calling here, called the islets of Langerhans. That's only actually about 1% of the pancreas. But it's probably the 1% of the pancreas is probably what most people know about. It's the 1% of the pancreas which is the endocrine part of the pancreas. It's the part that secretes insulin, obviously, glucagon, somatostatin, and pancreatic polypeptide. We're not going to worry too much about the endocrine function of the pancreas right now. We're really focused on the exocrine function of the pancreas, which is subserved by those dark clusters of cells, or the acini, because this is the cells that are making our pancreatic juice, which is full of all the pancreatic enzymes. Next slide here just shows you a very stylized sort of diagram of what we were looking at before. We've got the acini regions, or the acini cells here, which make up 99% of the pancreas. So these are the regions that are pumping out pancreatic juice into these tiny little ducts here, which gradually empty into larger ducts, etc. And surrounding that, or about 1% of the tissue, is in fact an endocrine tissue, and these are the cells that are responsible for making insulin, if it's a beta cell here. If we're an alpha cell here, we'd be making glucagon. If we're a delta cell here, we'd be making somatostatin. If we're an F cell here, we'd be making pancreatic polypeptide. And of course, the endocrine function of the pancreas is emptying those hormones into the blood. These are not things that are going into the small intestine. Okay? The things that are going into the small intestine, or pancreatic juice, are coming out of the acini cells, and these are the ducts that eventually form into the exit points of the pancreas. So what is all this exocrine secretions? What are these acini cells doing? They're making pancreatic juice. If you were to look at pancreatic juice, you would find it would be a clear and colourless liquid. Okay, it's, there we go, 1.2, 1.5 litres a day. So now we're getting up in terms of volume, aren't we? 1.5 litres of saliva, 2 to 3 litres of gastric juice, 1.2 to 1.5 litres of pancreatic juice. So we're really getting upwards to, say, 3 plus another 3. We're up to about 6 litres of secretions that have come into the small intestine. Okay, quite different to the stomach in terms of composition. Its pH is 7.1 to 8.2, so it's alkali. Remember, we looked at this composition of gastric juice, and it's right down at pH of 2, very acidic. It's composed mainly of water and some salts, sodium bicarbonate, which is one of the things that makes it alkali, and many, many enzymes, which we'll go through shortly. So the sodium bicarbonate, as we said, is an alkali, and it's very, very important because it neutralizes the stomach acid. Okay, so it's a slightly alkaline juice because of the bicarbonate ions in there, and it stops the action of pepsin, for example. So we don't want pepsin active in the duodenum or up into the pancreas, because it will start degrading peptides, etc., which could be part of the epithelial layer. So quite important in terms of the pH change, because it inactivates all the stomach enzymes, particularly pepsin, and it neutralizes the stomach acids. And it is, of course, full of pancreatic enzymes themselves. And there's the enzymes that are in there. We've got pancreatic amylase. So pancreatic amylase digests starch, or starts or continues that process of starch digestion, which we sort of started up in the mouth. We've got pancreatic lipase. So this is probably the main enzyme that's responsible for digesting down triglycerides. We did see it lingual lipase, and we saw some gastric lipase. Not super important in breaking down the triglycerides, but it's the pancreatic lipase that's quite important in giving us the ability to break down triglycerides and fatty acids. We've got many different protease enzymes in the pancreatic juice. We've got trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidase, proelastase, and an enzyme called trypsin inhibitor. Okay, so we're going to worry about trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidase, and proelastase. Now, first thing to notice about these enzymes that are secreted by the pancreas is they're all either precursors, as in the OGEN at the end of their name, trypsinogen, it's a precursor. Chymotrypsinogen, it's a precursor. And the other two, procarboxypeptidase, proelastase, these are also precursor enzymes. They are in fact inactive enzymes. So the pancreas doesn't secrete active enzymes. Okay, that kind of makes sense. We don't want the pancreas creating enzymes which are protease enzymes, which are going to end up digesting away the pancreas itself. So the pancreas secretes precursor enzymes that are only activated once they get to the duodenum. And how do they get activated? Well, the key in activating these pancreatic enzymes is, as the word says, enterokinase. Enterokinase is an enzyme that sits on the epithelial cells that line the duodenum. So it's called a brush border enzyme, but it's an enzyme that activates trypsinogen and turns it into trypsin. And once we've got active trypsin, it's trypsin that then activates chymotrypsinogen into chymotrypsin. It also activates procarboxypeptidase into carboxypeptidase, and it also activates proelastase into elastase. So we have some protease enzymes which are secreted as precursor enzymes, and they're activated in the small intestine by the first sequence of events through the action of enterokinase, converting trypsinogen to trypsin, and then that further allows the other enzymes to be activated. Okay. The other enzymes that we've got that are secreted by the pancreas are the ribonucleases and the deoxyribonucleases. Very important for breaking down the RNA and DNA. So RNA and DNA, they are carbohydrates. So we do digest RNA and DNA down from the carbohydrates, and we convert them into the pentose and ribose sugars that they are. So that's the ribonucleic acid and deoxyribose nucleic acid are just sugar molecules. So we derive energy from DNA and RNA in the food that we eat. So that's our enzymes that are in the pancreas. Now, turning now to the last part of the pancreas is, how do we know when to secrete all these enzymes? We spend a lot of time and energy making these enzymes and making all this liquid like pancreatic juice that's full of bicarbonate ions and, as we said, full of all these enzymes. How do we know when to release these enzymes, a little amount or a large amount or a short time or a long time? Okay. Most of the secretions of the pancreas are actually controlled by the autonomic nervous system, via the vagus nerve, and via hormones. And the hormones that we're worried about in this slide are secretin and CCK, or cholecystokinin. Okay. So what does secretin do? It's, as its name suggests, secretin is a hormone that's secreted by cells within the small intestine that stimulates pancreatic juice secretion. That's very, very rich in bicarbonate ions, and it enhances the effect of another hormone called cholecystokinin, or CCK. So what does CCK do? CCK does very similar things to what secretin does, except one extra thing. It stimulates the secretion of pancreatic juice, as secretin does. That's not just rich in bicarbonate ions, but very rich in enzymes. It promotes the normal growth and maintenance of the pancreas, enhances the effect of secretin. But as we'll learn later on in this session, CCK does one other very important thing, and it's to do with that other thing that empties into the small intestine right at the area where the pancreas is also emptying its secretions into the small intestine. Do you remember what other thing was emptying its secretions into that same area? It was the gallbladder. And CCK is the hormone that's responsible not just for making the pancreas secrete an enzyme-rich secretions, but it's also responsible for making your gallbladder contract and release its secretions down into the small intestine as well. So we have that really good hormonal regulation of the small intestine telling the pancreas what to release into the small intestine in order to digest the food that's in the small intestine. Okay? Not just through hormonal reflexes, but also through neural reflexes. So we see that in that diagram here. Probably a little bit misleading, the numbers there, 1, 2, 3 and 4, because it's not done in any particular order. But let's just have a look at 1 and 2. 1 and 2 is the neural control of how pancreatic secretions happen. Parasympathetic nervous system via the vagus nerve stimulates the secretion of pancreatic enzymes. So that's a neural reflex, that when our vagal nerve is active and our parasympathetic nerve is active, we're stimulating the pancreas to release all its secretions into the small intestine. But the other thing that's going on is acidic chyme. So acidic chyme from the stomach. So number 3 there is slowly being squeezed out of the stomach. Remember we talked about those squeezing contractions that are in the stomach, and it squeezes a small amount of food through the pyloric sphincter each time. And it's slowly emptying very small amounts of that food down into the duodenum. And that's detected by the cells that are in the small intestine. So in the duodenum there, we've got cells that can detect digested fats, proteins, etc. within the small intestine. And when they detect fats and proteins, etc., or partially digested ones, it stimulates the cells to release CCK and secretin. And what does that do? It has a local reflex in terms of a hormonal reflex, and we know that secretin and CCK then go off to stimulate the pancreas to secrete enzymes and a bicarbonate-rich fluid. So this is the kind of picture that we're getting with hormone regulation. Is the small intestine can sample what's in it. It tells the pancreas via the hormones how much pancreatic secretions to put into the small intestine, depending on the amount of partially digested fats and partially digested proteins. Okay? So this is where we sort of start to see, not so much now, but the influence of fats and proteins, how they influence the rate of gastric emptying, etc., which we'll come to later on. But it's really early on that we can see there's a hormonal regulation of how the pancreas is controlled. Okay. So that gets us to the end of our first Camtasia. We're going to finish now, and we'll come back and we'll have a look at the liver and the gallbladder and have a look at its role in digestion and then metabolism of the nutrients coming back from the small intestine. Okay, and we'll see you then. Bye now.